Hey, what's happening, everyone? Pragmatic Addict here. So, I just got back from seeing the new murder mystery horror film. What is it called? I almost said Death on the Nile. A Haunting in Venice. So, I'm gonna be completely honest. I wasn't that sold on this movie. Upon seeing it, I didn't really take it too seriously. Just from seeing the trailers, I was like, okay, it looks like dumb fun. It doesn't look that scary. I sure as hell am not taking this detective that seriously. But the reason why I was actually more excited to see this one than the other two films, Death on the Nile and the Murder on the Orient Express, which I have not seen, is because the two main themes of this movie are some of my favorite things. One of them being my absolute favorite genre, which is horror, and then the other half being murder mystery or whodunit. Also, for those that don't know, just in case, this film does not really connect to the other two films. The only way that this connects is that it has the same detective from those other two movies, but this is a new story, a new setting with new characters. It is its own movie just in this universe. So let's go ahead and dig into Haunting in Venice. So the first thing I want to note, and this was right off the bat, the camera angles in this film. It was one of those things where immediately I was like, my God, not only was I not expecting this thing to even be something so big to me in this movie, but I was not expecting to say, you know what? Even if this movie sucks ass, I'm going to have an absolute ride through this movie because of these goddamn camera angles. Holy hell. Also, just the aesthetic with it. The directing and everything. Even being someone who has not read the Agatha Christie novel that it's based on, you can tell just by looking at the movie and just by its tone and its pacing and again its aesthetic and directing that it is an adaptation of a novel. It just wears that on its sleeve. It just captures the essence of what it's supposed to be. Also, I didn't think about this too hard, like before seeing the movie or like just even going into it, but as a whodunit, the character arcs in this film are a lot of fun. For example, Tina Fey plays this best-selling like book writer of whodunits. That's like her genre. She also plays a character that is longtime best friends with this detective. So what I will say is that as a whodunit, it has everything that you can want out of it. It's got characters that it's focusing on a lot. They're vastly different from each other. They got equally enough reasons to be a suspect, but also just as much for you to be like, I don't want to say it's them. It does pretty good with having you sympathize with each character. Just as a murder mystery, it was a ride with it being the directing that it had, with its whodunit layers to it, also with it being a horror film. Also, the characters. I'm only going to talk about two of them because they're like the main characters and the ones I was most concerned about. That being Tina Fey and also the detective. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. There's that part of me that's like, oh boy, Tina Fey in a horror murder mystery. And then this guy with his mustache. I don't think that this movie's going to be that good. But I'm just going to say it. Tina Fey as this character, she just lends her signature in a very good way, where she kind of obviously brings that more comedic touch to the movie, but she doesn't overdo it, and it's just to like make light out of this kind of darker film. It's just Tina Fey being Tina Fey as this character, but not overdoing it to where it's like wholeheartedly, yeah, that's obviously Tina Fey. And also this detective, he was just interesting. I mean, I will say this, he did kind of feel a little bit too like Jacques Cousteau. Is that his name? The guy from the Pink Panther. And he still is just in general as goofy as he looks. He says very goofy things. He acts very goofy. Again, he has that kind of Jacques Cousteau like reminiscence. But just as a detective and as the main character, he was just so much fun to watch. He was entertaining. He was interesting. And he was just, again, a fun detective like a main character detective should be. But with all this being said, I do have to say something that I'm very not happy to say, and that is that as the movie goes on, it is one of those cases where it does get just a bit weaker as it goes on. For example, like especially in the middle half, the first thing that really kind of like disconnected me from the movie is that in the middle half or more, it does get really slow, where it's just focusing on like one character for minutes at a time, where the detective is like interrogating them, investigating them, and they're giving him like details and stories, and it feels like it's something that should be like a little bit of a layer peeled to getting closer to unraveling the mystery. But every single time, no matter what character it was, no matter what they were saying, it was always minutes at a time for one character, and the stuff they were saying just never really captured me. It just never seemed that interesting. It just didn't feel like something that needed to be there. It should have been elevated much more, especially with how surprisingly great the movie was up to its like middle half and going on. This also reminds me to just talk about the pacing and everything. So it's very respectable, but it is also just very kind of risky. Respectable in the sense of it's not like your typical whodunit. It is very slow. For the first half or so, you are just like learning about the characters, getting like settled in. It really feels like it is just the kind of like prologue of the story. You know, they're walking around this giant house, giving like a little bit of like a history and everything. They're kind of investigating it a little bit, trying to see first off like what everybody actually wants to accomplish here, because it does start off of like a seance. That's the whole plan, and then it turns into a murder. But I also think it's risky because it is not going to be what I think people are expecting or wanting. But I also, again, just respected it that much more because, again, it just makes it feel more like an actual story. Like, it makes it feel like a gothic horror murder mystery. Again, it just wears that, like, what it's supposed to be on its sleeve. Also, yes, I'm sure you guys are wondering about the horror. As a horror fan, as someone who went into this film thinking that it was not going to pay off, the horror is fucking good. There are times in this movie, especially like the first actual horror scene. I say horror scene because there are a lot of jump scares, but even with the jump scares, they're just well done. You're either not expecting them, or when they are happening, like the result of what the jump scare is, like what caused it, it just kind of makes sense. There was a variety of it. There were times, especially again with its first like lengthy horror scene, its first genuine scene, it just kind of caught me off guard and really just had me like glued to the screen to see what the film might actually pull out. But I will say this now, I think that the overall like reason, like what actually sets this movie into motion, where this detective feels like he needs to put the place on lockdown and keep everybody contained and solve this mystery, this murder, I do think it's a little bit underwhelming, because there was part of me that's like, well, not to give too much away, but I'm like, it could, in my opinion, it could be ruled as like a suicide. There are things that lead up to this death that obviously make it more suspicious that it's a murder, but for me, it just wasn't enough realistically to fully set this whole chain of events into motion right off the bat. But the effects of this death and things leading up to it, again, it was just well done, obviously in that horror aspect. There are also like little hints here and there as the movie goes on that to me just either felt forced or like they didn't really try too hard. They're just kind of like, oh, plot point, see this? Obviously that's suspicious. That's kind of like what it came off to the audience, and I'm just like, again, it was one of those things where it's like as it went on, it kind of got weaker and weaker, and it just kind of disappointed me a little bit because of how strong this movie was initially. Also, lastly, I don't really know how to talk about this, not only because it's like the ending and it's like, you know, spoilers and everything, but just in general how I felt about it. It is just very muddled ending. It reaches a little bit high, it doesn't really live up to it, and not only just with this ending, but just as the movie ends, looking back at it all in general, like just in retrospect, it just puts it in all a very weird place. Overall, the movie gets debatably weaker as it goes on, and I found the ending to be a bit muddled, but I enjoyed the movie more than I expected to. And yeah, I thought this one was fine overall. So that is going to be my review of, I almost said Murder at the Orient Express again, of Haunting in Venice. For those that do see this movie, let me know what you thought about it. Also, for those that are seeing this movie and have seen the other two, let me know, like, how it lives up to those two. Should I see those movies? Do you guys recommend them? Let me know. But with all that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good night.